Hello, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise TD3. Jimmy, it is Wednesday, October the 19th, 2022. Jimmy, and if it's Wednesday night,
It's Black Men Speak. So let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music, to our own studio and for us films. And if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Spread the word as we try to grow our channel. And Tom, it looks like you've come through with another interesting guest. So I want you to introduce the topic and our guest, and let's get started.
all right. Jimmy, of course, we've got greatness all over the place. And so we have now introduced another great to our virtual and YouTube audience today, Mr. Brother Arthur Gregg, a good friend and fraternity brother of ours that I've known for decades upon decades now. And, I was thinking, I think I was probably watching a TV show, and I just started thinking about Gen Z and all the different generations and things of that nature. And I was like, that would be a great topic discuss on our podcast. And the first person that came to mind is this gentleman here, Mr. Arthur Gregg, who has been working with young people for several years, and we're fortunate enough to have him on tonight. He's had an extremely busy day, but he was able to share some of his time and his talent with us. And so we are going to talk tonight about Generation Z, understanding Generation Z. Who are they? What are the trends they're shaping? How they're influencing the world? And why does it matter? So welcome to Black Men Speak, Brother Gregg. Say hello to our audience and tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Brother TD3, and all our guests. I'm excited to be here, man. When you reached out, and I think we almost had our own show just in the conversation when we first thought about it. You first reached out to me. So a little bit about my background. I am originally from Austin, Texas, but first generation college student, youngest of five, and never thought I would be in this space of being a part of or working in or having a career in higher education. And so I've been in higher ed or was in higher ed for over 30 years, working with college students, young, as we say, young folk or young people. And so retired in January, and part of my experience has been around work, training, development, leadership. But I had this whole epiphany one day about this generational, a multi-generational society, in the sense, talking to individuals who were considered boomers and Gen Xers, and just kind of tossing that around. And the story always begins with, well, man, when we were growing up, we did X. And I always tell a quick story, man. I was on campus, and young lady was popping popcorn in a microwave, and so she was just flustered, and she was oh, this needs to hurry up, this popcorn. And I'm being the man I am, I said, well, what's the problem? What's wrong? She said, this popcorn. I said, well, it's a microwave. It's only 3 minutes. That's just too long. And like we do, I said, when I was growing up, and we used to pop popcorn on the stove.
Yes.
She looked and she said, Mr. Gregg, she was like, y'all were poor. And I'm thinking, like, poor? She said, y'all couldn't afford a microwave. They like $29. You can even get a used microwave. And I said, well, they weren't even invented. And then she said, oh, you old. And so that's when I had this whole epiphany around this generational differences. And so when we talk about the generations and the importance of understanding the generations, because we all have to coexist in this world. And now the big focus in particular around the workforce, and as far as the church and in our communities, that we have 5 generations coexisting together. And so the newest or the latest generation is that Generation Z, which right now is mid 20s. So that kicks off at around 1990, born 1995, 1996, so 26, 27-ish. And so they're on the scene. They're in the workforce. They're in our communities. They're in our churches. And so how do we now deal with understand and communicate with this Generation Z when we've had so much time to spend that time with our millennials.
Right, right. And it's interesting you bring up that point because with me being a Gen Xer myself, and I remember they would making the hoopla about millennials and them growing up pretty much most of their life with technology in their hands and all this other thing, and then you had Gen Z coming along. I didn't really think that there was very much of a distinction or difference since they are very highly tech-driven generations. However, there are some nuances and differences in some of the research, and so that's what we want to begin to talk about and really talk about why that really matters and who that makes a difference to. But before we go into this, let's talk a little bit about who Generation Z is. You've talked about, when they came into the world and where they are right now, but who is Generation Z? And, tell us a little about what they're like.
So that's a good point. First of all, let's just let me define for you what a generation is. Because I think we throw these terms out and we throw these generations out and then how we got to these labels in generations, because in our communities, in particular our Black communities, we have been living in multi-generational in a multi-generational world. Even in our own communities, we just didn't call them that. We probably lived with grandma and aunt so and so, and then Junebug had a baby, and so the baby moved in. So we had all these different generations in the home. But when we think about what a generation is an identifiable group that shares birth years, age, location, and significant life events at critical developmental stages. And so the whole concept around where the labels came from really is nothing mystical or science about it. It's all around branding. It's around research. It's around marketing. It was really devised to have a better way to understand what each groups, when you think about putting folk in groups, what they're going to react to, how to market to them. And so when we think about the Gen Z, let's go back and think about who are the parents of most of our Gen Z? The Gen Xers. But pretty much when you start thinking about it, the Gen Xers are the parents of a lot of our Gen Zs. And so you think of the influences of what Gen Xers were our first to go to daycare. They were our latchkey kids. They saw a lot of, so they had this sense of independence. So they also were the ones that said, when I grow up, I'm never going to make my kids do X. And guess what? We are now seeing the results of that. Or when we said, I'm not going to make my kids go to church. I'm not going to make my kids eat green beans. I'm not. So now the byproducts of those individuals. So when we look at our Gen Zs, our Gen Zs are the most racially and ethnically diverse group that we have. So if you think about it, they are when they look at diversity, when they think about diversity, whereas some of our older generations see it as race, ethnicity, gender, all of that, they see diversity as knowledge, skills, and ability. Because they're looking at it, they're not looking at Jimmy's my friend. So what? Jimmy is Korean. Jimmy is Indian, but Jimmy is my friend. I don't see him being different in color. I'm seeing him being that we play soccer together and we're very good at soccer, or we are 1 and 2 in math class. And so it's not how we are accustomed. We being older. I'm a boomer, but I'm a cusper. So I'm on the cusp of boomer and baby boomer and Gen X. We also think about our Gen Zs when I think about what they value. They value things like compensation. Think about everything they see. It's about how I'm gonna get paid. The music they listen to. It's about getting paid. Everything is about how can I get paid. So they think about compensation, benefits. They are a very, we talk about technology, but it's beyond just having it. Technology is everything from FaceTiming. They're real big on FaceTiming, and they want to see you right then and there. We think about Gen Z. Our Gen Z groups are pretty much very independent. You talk about activism. You talk about things that are important to it, global warming, and so that's something that's big, the environment. I think about my god kids who are Gen Zs. They're big on recycling. I mean, because they're like, y'all have given us this world that is dying. And so how can we save our world? And
You know,
that's across the board.
and you bring up a very interesting point. You know, clearly we live in the same world, but they live in a different world, technologically, socially, politically, than what we or our parents or our grandparents grew up in. And so you mentioned a couple of things about events, world events, things that have happened that have shaped our behaviors. I mean, for instance, my grandmother, grandparents, you know, they were young, but they lived through the after effects of, for instance, the Great Depression,
Mm-hmm.
World War II. You know, if they were old enough, World War One, and you think about parents, depending on how old our parents are. You know, my father, you know, talks a lot about Vietnam. They talk about some of the things, Richard Nixon and Watergate and those types of things that influenced and shaped behaviors and attitudes. And I think we all have those. And so when you think about this group of young people at this point, and you talk about those events, those things that influence their thoughts, their behaviors, how they respond to things, what does that look like? Even, most of us lived through it, we were just older.
Well, think about it. In my lifetime, I would have never thought I would see a black president.
True.
For some, that's all they've seen. In my lifetime, I never thought I'd see a female vice president. That's all that they've seen. So the mindset of you can be anything you really put your mind to be, they have I'm witnessed that, to where I know I was told that, but I was you can be anything you want to be, but they didn't get the but, they got the and.
Mm.
You know, you can be anything.
Unpack that. When you say when they didn't get the but, they got the and. Unpack that. What does that mean?
So we got you can be anything you want to be, but here are things that you can't do.
Gotcha.
For them, it's you can be anything you want to be, and bam. And so the world had opened, it's open for them. I mean, you think about it. Think about the things that they have experienced, what they've seen. They have seen political hypocrisy. They have seen, and so when they think about politics, I think older generations are more loyal. They're like, we're loyal to the USA. They're like, well, the USA is not exactly like you painted it out to be for us. And so what are they loyal to? They're loyal to self. I think one of the most important things that have shaped them is the sense of security. I think about being a kid going to school and learning all of our drills were around weather. We had the tornado drills. These kids are like seeing death next to them. They're dealing with active shooter drills. They're dealing with high alert security. I could never imagine going to school walking through a metal detector. So, or every year we got I'm excited about a brand new backpack. But think about it. Your backpack now as a Gen Xer, if you're a Gen Zer, if you're in school, it's clear. You're thinking on college campuses, you're thinking about this whole concept of what does freedom of speech really look like? How do we deal with this? So the things that our generations, our parents saw being put in place to protect us are now being taken away from us. And who's protecting us now? And so think about what they're seeing now about this whole mindset. Even the exposure to guns. We think about how TV has evolved. Think about where TV is now versus where it first started with boomers.
Gotcha.
So that all of that has shaped how our Gen Zers really view the world and view us as the leadership.
That's a very interesting point, because you talk about mass media. the television. Our parents, grew up on radio, and then there was the evolution of television. But corporate and political interests pretty much controlled everything and all of the programming. And we are seeing pretty much a flip on that as mass media has become less television, radio, and is now, it went from laptops with millennials maybe to mobile phones now. And now we're looking at, watches that have just as much technology as well. And they have flipped that control factor. And we start talking about the economics now. That they are influencing that we could not have imagined. So when we talk about businesses, how businesses are building themselves, who is influencing, the behaviors when it comes to global companies, and how millennials, and to probably a higher degree Generation Z, is influencing business.
Yeah, and think about it. Think about it. How when you were in college, how many friends did you have that lived in other countries?
None.
So now look at the networks that the Gen Zers have. They have networks that far expand anything that we could imagine. So they got friends in Yugoslavia. They got friends in Africa. They got friends in India. They got friends in all these other companies, all these other countries that now they're connected to. So they're having conversations. So they're talking global when we're still trying to learn local, And so the mindset and the influence, I think about even study abroad. It's a whole mindset. How kids now, the Gen Zs are like, I'm going to go backpacking in Europe. I'm going to go to all these places that we only read about and thought about, but because they have larger networks through social media, through mass communication, that they have opened up. So, how do you think all of these businesses now are over in these different countries? Who are they targeting now? The Gen Zers.
Interesting. So millennials, Gen Z, for folks in maybe Gen X, boomers, maybe even the greatest generation, the silence, probably short of yourself because you've spent so much time between these two generations. Many of us may think, well, aren't they kind of the same? I mean, they're very tech driven. They grew up at a very young age, with a laptop, with a mobile phone. They swipe, they don't dial, or God forbid, dial a phone like we had to when we were kids.
Right.
Is there a significant difference between millennials and Gen Z?
I don't think it's a big difference. I think if anything, it's it's almost you have it's almost a split in the millennials. You have those that are closer to the Gen Xers who again are influenced and think like the Gen Xers, but you have a large percentage of millennials who are closer to Gen Z or Zennials. And so the thought process, I would say if any difference is that Gen Zs are millennials 2.0. Really. I think millennials may think it and they may strive to do it. Gen Zers do it. They go over and beyond. And so I don't think there's a big difference. And one of the things that I was reading, it talks about that they have similar viewpoints, which I thought was really interesting on major issues, government versus business. So they're more. They think that government should really be more about solving the problems of individuals versus business. Because they think if we elect the government, they should be doing more for us versus we depending on the businesses to do more. And so it's real interested in that mindset, about how they do that. And here's the other thing. They are very big on voting because they think they want their voices heard. They know they want their voices heard. And so, I think the difference is not a real big difference, and even with their
technology. Not yet anyway.
Right, not yet. As we tend to go, you'll start to see a shift. But even with technology, even thinking, even going on to technology, the difference between a cell phone and a smartphone. A cell phone for a lot of millennials was just that, a cell phone. You call people on it, you did more. Now a smartphone is a little computer. You know,
Right.
and you think about it, you don't hear many millennials talking about, oh, I FaceTime my family, I FaceTime Gen Z. Why drive? All of my social skills and my everything I want to do social with my friends and all of that, I can either do it via Call of Duty, I can do it via my cell phone, I don't have to go out and be social. I can be social all in my room by myself.
Gotcha. Yeah, we have a couple of folks who are online right now. We have Mr. Edward Willis. Thank you for joining us on the chat line. It says, speaking as a father of two sons, age 35, clearly a millennial, and 21, there are some interesting or what he calls significant differences. And so we're asking him to share some insights on what he sees as some clear difference between his sons, one a millennial and one a Gen Z. As we continue to talk through this, you mentioned something a little bit earlier in terms of influence in the workplace. But let's talk about how Gen Z is shaping trends in America and globally. You talked a little bit about workforce, working from home and that becoming the standard. We look at the last couple of years during COVID and people were forced to work from home. What are you seeing in terms of just trends in terms of workforce, economics, politics, social issues that Gen Z is beginning to shape, or that maybe millennials owned and Gen Z is expanding?
I think the political activism, I think things from you seeing more engaged in the political scene. There was a show the other night. It was basically the eyes of the political process through millennials. And so they talked about millennials and Gen Zers. They're going to be out there on the front line. You can't treat us any kind of way anymore. You can't talk to us any kind of way anymore. We have rights. And so you're starting to see them participating more in, when you look at the marches after the murder of George Floyd, anything that you've seen really millennials out there, you've seen Gen Z out there in the schools. And here's the thing that really gets me is when what surprised me is when you start to see these walkouts in high schools, walkouts in middle schools behind social and political issues. When it comes down to gender expression, LGBTQ plus rights, you see these students who are standing up for what they believe in. They're standing up for their peers who may not who express their gender, who are living their truth, and for teachers and for all those people who support them. When the school districts and whomever are like saying, well, you got to go, you can't do this. Who's out there? Who's walking out first? It's those Gen Z. So they're very politically and socially active.
Gotcha. No, that makes complete sense. Very intriguing, Jimmy. And I know you've been kind of kicking back, and I know you have some thoughts and ideas. So, you have any thoughts or questions?
Well, I'm just wondering about the political activists. And historically, young people have a terrible voting record. And so, what do you think has changed over the years to whether, I guess, Gen Zers are maybe more politically active in expressing themselves as far as involving themselves in protests and getting the word out, but do they really show up at the polls when it comes time to vote?
That's a good point, and I think they show up at the polls. I don't think. Well, I think when we include them, when we teach them about, because it's one thing about, hey, I'm a stand up for what I believe in. I'm gonna speak out about it. But it is another thing to say, this is how you do it. This is how you get to the polls. So I think, honestly, we do a good job of registering them. And I think we go out there and we register all these people, but we don't do such a good job of the next step, which is making sure that they're not just registered, but they're voting. And so how do we get them there? I think we've got to strategize and really turn to them to see how are you going to take the next step? Because it's really exciting about, oh, I'm registered to vote.
And hey, gentlemen, it looks like we have a call coming in. So let me take this call and see what we got, and we'll include him in the conversation. Good evening. This is Black Men Speak. Tommy Duncan, your co-host. If you could introduce yourself, where you are from, and what your question or thought is.
Yeah, this is Edward Willis from Dallas, Texas. I made a comment earlier about my two sons.
Yes, thank you.
And just some of the differences, and just, your guest was talking about politics, and that is a significant difference between the two of them.
So what are you seeing from your perspective, in your own household when it comes to your sons, when you talk about the politics or the difference in the politics between millennials and Gen Z, even though it may be a small sample survey?
Well, I mean, both my kids are really politically active and have been pretty much since they knew anything about politics. Everything from the reenactment to the March on Washington, which my youngest son took part in, to demonstrations in more than one city against Trump, to the George Floyd demonstrations in Dallas, even when he was a high school student. So, my oldest son's a PhD, college professor, still super active. My youngest son's a sophomore in college in Canada, still fiercely politically active, but they do it differently. Because my oldest son was born in 1987, before the internet and before a lot of the technology that we now take for granted. He has a much stronger tie to institutions as being an element of his education and furtherance of his life, because it was institutions like public school. Started in private school, then we moved in public school, but the school system, other parents, church communities, things like that were influential in helping to shape him when he was young. Then he adopted the technology once it came along, but he still has a respect for institutions. My youngest son, being born in 2001, he was born basically a month after 9/11. His entire life has been a disruption. Right? His birthday is today, by the way. Today he turned 20.
All right, happy birthday.
Yeah. So his life has been a disruption. Everything from 9/11 to the financial crash of 07, 08. Then you get Obama, you get people that love him, people that hate him. You get, Trump, you get all the other stuff that's gone on. And he does not have faith, or has very little faith in institutions. Even though he went to private school, had a good experience there, he's in college, loves college, but he sees those as pathways, not something that you hold on to. And he'll vote every time, every election. But unlike my oldest son, he would probably think about participating in the process at some point as a candidate. My youngest son, no. It's very individualistic with him, and his beliefs and his ability to express it through technology and with his friends. The shared thoughts that they have. So they kind of create their own bubble to a certain extent. Gen Z does. And they create their own language that operates within that bubble. So as a parent, I do a lot more listening to him to really understand what he's talking about and what's important to him. Whereas with my older son, I can have more of a adult to adult conversation, because we speak a little bit closer to the same language. We understand the systems and the way the government works, and neither of us repudiate it. We simply understand the process. The younger generations, my son, his friends, some of them are very wealthy, kids from very wealthy backgrounds of all races. They don't have faith in institutions at all. Right? They're thinking about their own advancement, basically creating their own environment in which they can succeed. This is one of the reasons that they vote. This is one of the reasons they turn out for social justice, environmental justice, and things like that. They want the world to be a better place. Their view of a better place, they want that. But they're not necessarily going to be dependent upon institutions. They're much more dependent upon their own force.
Okay.
think of Korea, for example, and you think of what we consider army over there. This army of kids that can influence elections all over the world, that take over the internet, that keep you from getting your message out or make sure you get your message out. All those things, those are very individualistic acts.
Mm-hmm. No.
They're using that certain power.
Mm-hmm. Very, very intriguing points when you have the same household, same parenting, but when you look at the things that have shaped their lives in terms of world events, how it has influenced their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say that it's polar extremes, but definitely very distinct differences when you talk about just traditional institutions, such as education, such as the church. We're definitely into that a little bit.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Ask his brother Lewis if he thinks his younger son will grow out of that as he gets older. Transition.
So what Jimmy has asked is that, do you think that your younger son, who is just 21 and just becoming adult, may grow out of that as he matures in time? Is this part of it maybe a reflection of experiences, but through age he may evolve into someone that is more institutionally driven, and maybe this is a reflection of his age?
More like his older brother
I think,
like his older brother.
I think that a lot of that really depends upon environmental experiences. When I say environmental experience, I'm not talking about trees and rivers and that type of thing. I'm talking about the world in which we exist in.
Mm-hmm.
We exist right now at a time of very high volatility. So if you are not a person who is very well grounded, and my youngest son is extremely well grounded. Okay, I mean this is not a kid that he's straight A's through high school.
Mm-hmm.
He's straight A's in college. He works. He has a job even as he goes to college in Canada. He has a job. Had to get a work permit to do it. He's salt of the earth kind of kid, but he sees things in very short time slots.
Mm.
Because every time that his feet get set, the world flips.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This incredible volatility that we have it makes them extremely nimble, and they're comfortable being that nimble. The thing of it is, they don't depend on you. They don't depend on the institution.
Okay.
They don't have that belief in the systems that we did. They're creating systems. And a lot of their systems work extremely well. A lot of their systems are in and out, bang. They don't care. Crypto could crash. They'll do something else because they're accustomed to living in an environment like that.
Yep.
Hop from this foot to that foot.
Very, very interesting. Any closing thoughts, Evan? We appreciate, these very, very poignant thoughts that you brought up. Any other closing thoughts?
I will say this because of what your guest said earlier, which is very true. They're the most diverse group as far ethnically diverse group ever. A lot of mixed marriages. A lot of these kids, more so than ever before, come from mixed marriages that not only mixed races but different cultures. The other thing is that they value education in a different way. They're all going to get education. Unless you're you've been living under a rock, and we do have some young men, especially within our race, that I think live under a rock. They don't understand the world. Most of these children, African American, white, Asian, Hispanic, whatever, they're becoming very educated. They're becoming very educated not to help the society. They're becoming very educated to help themselves.
Got it.
They see it as a way to cement themselves because they can't depend on us. The only way out of 2 points, and I'll be done. Number one, the way to them is economic because that they understand. Money, markets, all that kind of stuff. They got that down. They got it down. They know how to move markets. So when we want to reach out to them, and I'm talking about we in a very large sense, and this is what marketers do, they're using these influencers and different things to reach out to them and cause them to get in movements by these products and that product and whatever, right?
Right.
So that's one way of reaching them and trying to kind of steer them in a direction that is understandable to the rest of us. The problem is that most of us that are baby boomers, or, you know, I consider myself a Joneser, and that's a whole nother thing. But those of us that are in that age group, we're going to fade out of the picture. And the group that's most closely linked to them, the millennials, have some of their characteristics. Not all of them, but they have some of their characteristics, especially the use of social media.
Yes.
That is going to create a kind of momentum where traditional avenues of influence are going to wane. You already see newspapers dying.
Yep.
You've already seen print magazines and all that stuff die.
Yep.
Network television, ABC, CBS, Fox, all that stuff, man, hanging on by a thread.
Yep.
Believe it. Because they don't do that. They make individual selections. You know, through whatever. You could call it Netflix. My oldest son watches nothing but Korean stuff on Netflix. Right? There's no American advertising, branding, any of that stuff tied to that. You know, the stuff that my youngest son watches on YouTube, there's very little traditional branding or anything that's tied to that. So the influence that they are going to have by sheer numbers, they're not going to war and dying, right? They're not. So their numbers are growing, and they're going to be more multiracial. They date outside their race more than anybody that has probably ever existed in the world. So we're going to have a more multiracial, multicultural society. It's not going to look like the traditional world that we are comfortable in or find ourselves most comfortable in, right? It's not going to happen. So to answer your question, will we grow out of it? Yeah, but it won't look like what I think growing out of it means.
Gotcha.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much, brother. That was good to have you as always, and thank you for calling in and very, very insightful points.
Yeah.
He said it. I mean, you know, everything he said, if you just from the financial piece, if you look at it, right now, Gen Z makes up is about 2 billion. You look at numbers, and they make up about 25% of the global workforce. So think about that mindset and that shift, as he was saying. You know, the education piece is about them, and they're not, you know, not loyal to the institution, but to self. You know, when I think about what they're watching, as he talked about, the Japanese stuff, the anime, the TikTok is that's like the gospel, you know, and so they're listening to these people, they're following. It goes again to this global mindset of the networks are so much larger than we could ever imagine.
Okay.
Yep. And why don't we do this, Jimmy? If we want to take a quick commercial break, it's right about 8:40. We can do that, and then we. All right, everybody, we are back to Black Men Speak. We are talking about Gen Z, understanding Gen Z. We've had some very, very deep and profound revelations about what Generation Z looks like and how they're impacting the world. And so we're going to continue that conversation with the last 1/3 of our show tonight. We were talking about this briefly, Brother Gregg, and so I thought it was very apropos that Edward talked about Generation Z the disruptive forces that has shaped their thinking, how that has influenced their behavior. And we talked about institutions because one of the things, Jimmy, and we've talked about this as well, and we've seen this, how our younger generations, millennials to a certain degree, Generation Z probably put like a 2.0 on that, are moving away, for instance, institutions that are a mainstay for older generations, the church in particular. We talked about this before our show started. You've been working with millennials and Gen Z, but when we talk about the Black community, from the post-Reconstruction period, pretty much through the 20th century, the church has been, to a certain degree, the centerpiece of shaping values, behaviors. We talked about a lot of these things a little bit earlier, but that's changing a little bit. And we're seeing that, with these younger generations of people. You were talking a little bit about, some of the things that your church is doing to address that. But the church for the Black community has probably been the central institution that we have used to influence our community in terms of behaviors, values, economics, politics, leadership, everything. Let's talk a little bit about that, what you're seeing, and then what's at stake.
Again, it goes back to institutions, as you said. The church is seen as an institution. We talked about earlier the fact that, we as a people, we as a community used to live around the church. Now, we've moved away from the church physically, spiritually. And so things have become, anytime you put a gap in something, it's easy for something to fill that gap. I talk to more of my friends who have kids who are on Sunday mornings, they're at basketball camps, they're at or tournaments, they're at baseball tournaments, volleyball tournaments. And so, that gap where the church filled that gap, now it's all of these other things that have filled the gap. And some of the institutions are the things that we have created. Some of our social groups that have conferences and things that they do on Sundays. And so, we think about this Sunday as a whole, but we think about the church as a mindset. We've seen the church go through a lot. We've seen all kind of scandal in the church. Again, when the brother talked about how our younger millennials and our Gen Z view the church and the hypocrisy, in the sense of we talked about them being diverse, the whole issue around the Black church versus LGBTQ plus issues. And if my friend who identifies as asexual, or if my friend who identifies as uses the pronouns that are different from what he appears to be, can't go to church, then I'm not going there either. Because now you started to, and so you see the mindset has been, we built the church as this institution. And what our Gen Zers are saying, like I say, hey, this ain't what I'm about.
Do you think Gen Zers are more susceptible to false information? I think one of the comments on the chat line was about the media and the flow of information and who's the arbiter of facts today, of truth. Institutions used to play that role, but now when you get away from institutions and everyone has a voice, how do they sort out who's the arbiter of truth?
And thank you for bringing that up, Jimmy, because it looks like we have Ms. Reese, Celia Reese, who brought up a point or a question that speaks to that. Can you talk about the impact of social media and the fact finding of information? And, part of what I would add to that is, those with the biggest pockets determine the truth. It can be very interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the gospel according to the gospel according to Google. Now is I could just Google it. If Google said it, it's the truth. Where does a place that the library play? Where does it, when you talk about doing research now, what does research look like? Versus now where social media, again, going back to TikTok, and all of those different platforms that you have these self-proclaimed leaders and folk that have all this information that you don't know where they're getting it from. And so they're getting it into a generation who says, I'll believe you before I believe them.
And as I was doing the research, I believe that I saw that Gen Z is pretty much skewed towards TikTok versus millennials, which skew towards Instagram, for instance, when it comes to social media. Exactly. Yeah. And so they look at their Bible. Millennials, they look at, they kind of steer towards Instagram. Gen Z, their Bible is TikTok.
Right. But if you look at both of them, you know, it again goes back to the attention span too. I mean, you know, it's short. You're not gonna sit there and watch. You'll sit there and watch it all day, but it's not the same thing. You're going
1 minute clips, yeah.
Show after show after show after this after this. You're searching. Whereas, and so all of it is quick. It's all instant. It's all that quick. I'm gonna go here. They said this, and so you think about that. It's them. It's the ability whereas to sit down and have a conversation with Gen Z. You're lucky to have a conversation face to face. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the things we have gotten away from is that we have not really told and had conversations about how this came about. You know, we talk about the Black church. Why is this important? Why do we do this? I grew up in a generation with the mindset of when you question, the answer was because I said so. And so I didn't question things because that was the answer that I felt I was going to get. Whereas now you got a generation that's questioning everything. And for some of us, we don't have the answers, and we're not confident enough to say that.
I also have a message here from Brother Asar Al-Kabilan, and this is kind of referring to something that was brought up a little bit earlier. Gen Zers born into a world of perpetual war, violence, terrorism, domestic and international, ubiquitous technology, financial crisis, presidency of a Black president, gender, sexual fluidity, immediate access to information and entertainment. Also said Gen Zers lead by consensus. How does everybody feel about this? And so there are a lot of different things when you think about this entire network of a quarter of the globe's population that are all connected at the same time and can influence that type of consensus and behavior.
Yeah, that's a great point. A great point. I mean, and even like the other caller said about being in a world that's constantly there's no stability. You know, as soon as you get your feet under something else that comes through, whether it's Katrina to COVID to it's constantly something that's flipping you around. You know, and so again, who are you going to be loyal to? The system or to yourself? And that even goes for babies. I mean, that goes for the younger ones too. We can't leave the young ones out. We talked about earlier the next generation, which will be Generation Alpha. You know, imagine what they will be like.
Yes. How are they on the flip side, that is Gen Z, influencing Gen X or boomers for that matter?
Right. I go back to the technology. I think it goes back to educating them on the technology, helping us with the technology piece, because we have been so cut off from the world because a lot of us don't know it, don't have it. And so to really push the technology piece to reconnect families, I think during COVID, through social media, we saw more people come together through technology, through whether it was on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And who was leading that? It was your Gen Zers that were helping set up those things. How do you think we got, let's go FaceTime. I want to FaceTime. I want to see grandma. Well, how are we going to do that? Let's FaceTime her. Well, how do we do that? You know, Facebook came up. Why do you think Facebook came up with the new the system where you could, it's like the little box. I don't even know what you call it. But you could FaceTime. You didn't have to have a phone. All you had to have was Facebook, and you could call up your contacts on Facebook, and it's like Facebook Live on the screen. So I think they influenced it to really, during a time when we could have really lost a lot and really were separated, they helped us really come together and stay connected. And so I think we have to give them their props and celebrate. You know, again, we did the same thing with millennials. We did the same thing with Gen X. We harp on what they don't do or what they haven't contributed, and we really don't highlight what they bring to the table and how they really help us move forward.
In some respects, Brother Greg, in other respects, they don't. Some of them just haven't lived enough life to voice. Like I come to mind, I can't think of the little girl's last name, but I know she's from Sweden, the little Greta girl on climate change.
Right.
Very vocal a couple of years ago, saying the world's going to come to an end in 10 years. I mean, I was amazed how many people believe that nonsense.
Right.
The world's not going to come to an end in 10 years. You will grow up to be an adult and have a family if you so choose. But she's sitting there saying her life was over because the world was coming to an end. So, I see that group as being highly susceptible to emotional messages, which is dangerous because I think hopefully maturity and age will help them get to a point where they can scrutinize information and opinions a little better. What say you?
Right. Well, and I like what the caller said about his sons, about how he communicates with them where they are, how he communicated with his older son because he knew the best way to communicate him. With his younger son, he said, I listen to him and I communicate. So I think we tend to communicate based on young versus old as opposed to just individually, because I'm wondering who was communicating with that young lady. How do we communicate with? That's one of the things I learned worked on the college campus is to sometimes to just listen more than I talk. And the more I listened, the more I figured out what they didn't know. And my job was to help fill in what they didn't know. But I had to listen and learn the language. I might not agree with it. It might have taken me a little longer to learn it. But once I learned the language, then we could have a conversation. I think we don't spend a lot of time talking. We don't spend enough time in conversation. We spend enough talking at each other.
Right.
You bring up an interesting point, but let me push back on that a little bit because, I'm Gen X, you're right on the cusp of Gen X and Boomer, correct?
Right.
When it comes to our channels of communication and communication style, that is real when you have a generation of generations that are one, for instance, my parents' generation, it was more face-to-face, it was more verbal.
Right.
That new technology was the telephone. We think about a millennial and a Gen Z, they are much more comfortable communicating through technology, phone, otherwise, as they do, more so than they do directly face-to-face. I will see people who are literally right across from each other, but they're communicating through a phone.
Right.
I have to young people, that they are antisocial. They have a discomfort with communicating face-to-face or directly with people. How do you bridge that gap when that is becoming prevalent?
Well, I think a lot of the fact of being antisocial, I go back to saying, our parents talked at us, so we picked up a lot of that talking at folk as opposed to talking to. I think when you talk about they spend more time on the platform through texting or group chat, whatever, that's a lot of peer talk. I find that I engage folk. When I see young folk, when I see them on it, I engage them. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? Let's have a conversation. And I have learned working with we work with young males, African-American males. And one of the things is, if you engage them in conversation and listen to them and let them get it out, and it ain't easy because I'm one of them who says, boy, you wrong. But what I have learned is to listen, to understand, not to respond.
Gotcha. And I think that's something that everybody can learn from.
Yeah. Yes. I ask. I said, educate me, help me understand this. I want to, and then I sit back and I just kind of let them go. And if it sometimes it just be like, that's some bull. But the next time I see him, when I engage in conversation, I think because you give, and I think it again is how we approach them. Yeah, they're going to spend more time on FaceTime. They're going to spend a lot of time on that. That's because, I just think that antisocial piece is you can talk more to your peers than you can you get more out of this. I don't know, but I think more so to have conversations, really to listen, to just hear them out. Don't try to tell them what they're saying is wrong. Don't you talking about? You too young. I just want to hear.
What about the want to be seen aspect of the Gen X's and Gen Zs? They seem to be trying to document a good portion of their life, and a lot of times that could be hazardous as you
Yeah.
get older and you've done some really dumb, stupid things when you were young, and you put it out there into the to the clouds where it doesn't go away. It's always there. Um, so it may hurt you employment wise, it may hurt you relationship wise later on. So can you speak to that about that need to always put parts of your life out there for people to for everyone to see or to share it?
That's an interesting piece because I think I would some of that I would really fought with reality TV because now it became the thing. You put your life out on TV and you get paid for it. You see what I'm
Yeah,
saying? And so, hopefully one of your highlight reels, somebody's gonna pick up that highlight reel. And as an influencer, you putting yourself out there, the more people you get to follow you, as someone was saying earlier, it can become a financial windfall. You can make I really blame when we start putting reality folk on TV, they're living their lives on TV, and then we start talking about how much they getting paid. The Kardashians, all them folk that's getting paid. Well, shoot, I'm gonna put mine out there. Then they living out loud. I'm living my life out loud. Then it comes back to that financial piece. This is just who I am. I'm gonna put it out there, and I don't think they see. I think we view life different in the sense of longevity because you think about it. We think about retirement. They think about shoot. This job paying, so I'm gonna go over here and get this job. I'm gonna keep because I don't know how long I'm gonna be here.
right. Got a point.
Very apropos. Last thing, we'll make it very quick because we have a couple of minutes before the top or the end of the hour. One of the things that we have always been conscious of, in our prior generation, and it's because of our very distinct and unique history in the United States, is our need and sense of strengthening and maintaining culture, Black culture, the relevance of that. And so when we were talking a little bit earlier, and he was mentioning, for instance, Edward, about his being very multi-generational. You mentioned, the most diverse generation, in history. Do you see that there is a sense of understanding the importance of maintaining that sense of history and culture, and why we must keep the history, the culture intact in order to maintain our literal survival and or relevance? Is that a prevalent conversation? Is that something that connects now? Or has it become so broad and so diverse that it's not as relevant to younger generations?
I think all of that you said. I think the key thing is yes, we have to continue to talk about culture. We got to continue to talk about where we come from, who we are. We've got to continue that. I think what we have done is we've given somewhat permission for them to share it and give it away to others to benefit off of our backs. And I think a lot of that comes from not knowing how we got it.
Right.
The lessons learned.
Right. And so it's easy to give away if you don't know how you got it. That's why I'm so glad that they're focusing on the Emmett Till movie that's coming out. Till. To see where so to see that it's not a thing to let somebody sell you at an auction for fun.
Right.
And the question is, and how do you not understand the significance and or the relevance of even being a party to that without not understanding the history of your ancestors and why there is something wrong with that?
Because I think a lot of us are relying on the school to teach it as opposed to us teaching it at home.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And we're moving away from, we don't want to, we got other things to talk about. We don't want to make anybody else feel uncomfortable. But we got this. They're telling you now, we're not going to talk about it in school. So if we don't talk about it in the homes, in the community, and if we don't have those conversations, we're going to lose it.
Gotcha. All right. I'll bring up a couple of chat comments that we have, and then we'll wrap it up. one from Brother Hassan, the final analysis. It's not our world. It doesn't belong to Gen Z. It doesn't belong to boomers. We cannot judge Gen Zers by our values and our standards. It belongs to all of us. So to your point, we do have to listen and understand. It's a shared world. And then Everett Willis, with Gen Z, the truth is very personal. Their truth is formed by interpersonal relationships, real time, literally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Any closing comments before we wrap up this show, because it is right at 9 o'clock?
You know, I just want to say one thing. I wish, so we've had these conversations with the other generations.
Right.
I think now it is just because of social media, because of all that we have now, it's more prevalent, I think. But when the Gen Xers were coming on the scene, what do you think the conversations that the boomers and the traditionalists were having? When the millennials were coming on the scene, what do you think the conversation? So this is not a new conversation
Right.
with Gen Zs. We've been having these conversations. It's now being, they say the revolution is being televised. It's now, the conversation is now being televised.
Gotcha. So you're talking about the proverbial "we're going to hell in a handbag" conversation.
Exactly. Exactly. The first time Prince was played in my house, we had to go to church all week. Because that was devil music. And that's what's wrong with this generation. Just devil music. And that was just Prince. So, you know, Gen Z is just being televised. This is just that's the point.
Well, Tom, let's go ahead and wrap up because we are a little bit over. So, any closing words, thoughts?
I would say this, Jimmy. We want to thank again Brother Gregg for joining us tonight.
Yes.
Again, we want to make sure that for those who do need to get in contact with Brother Gregg, and again, reinforce what you do, Brother Gregg, and what services you offer for those who might be interested.
Great, thank you. I provide training and consulting on areas from diversity, equity, inclusion, this whole multi-generational workforce and society, leadership development, professional development, college and career, anything in that nature. That's my thing. And so I am there to assist, man.
And so you work with educational institutions, corporations.
Yes. Organizations, churches. You know, I work with the small groups, the large groups, anybody that wants positive change or even wants to understand change.
Okay. And when you talk about the expected outcome when you deliver your consulting services, your training and development, what are the expectations after an engagement?
The expectation is one, the awareness, because a lot of times it's all about the awareness, and two, the conversation, and three, my job is to go in and set up and start the conversation and give you the tools to continue. Absolutely. I'm not coming in to solve the problem. I'm coming in to help you with the tools to solve your problem.
Okay.
Which ultimately can come down to dollars and cents. We found out that in very hard ways in every institution, academia, large corporations, etc. This stuff matters and makes economic impact.
Yes, most definitely.
All right, folks, that's all I have for today. Jimmy, any closing words, and we'll call it a wrap.
Thank you, Brother Gregg, for coming out. Hopefully you'll come back.
Of course.
So the last time. And yeah, I definitely would like to know more about some of the work you do, especially with young men, because I think building the next generation of leaders is important.
Right. Well, and Chad, I know you got to close out. One of the things that we are focusing on now with our young men is the importance of understanding STEM and how it will move us forward.
Yes, for sure.
All right. That's all, folks.
All right.